The Bennett family was the epitome of success in Maple Shore, a picturesque coastal town known for its pristine beaches and upscale boutiques. Their organic skincare brand, Didn Naturals, was more than just a business. It was a legacy. Founded by their mother, Eleanor Bennett, the brand had grown from a kitchen experiment into an empire, now helmed by her 3 children. Emily was the polished face of the company, dazzling investors with her charm. Noah was the steady hand, running production with meticulous precision. Grace, the youngest, was the visionary, with a knack for creating products that seemed to capture the essence of nature itself. But the harmony of their carefully curated image was shattered one spring morning. Grace sat at her desk in the bright, airy R&D lab, surrounded by shelves of essential oils and test tubes. Her latest formula, a revolutionary plant-based serum, was finally ready after years of work. She had been refining it in secret, envisioning it as her breakthrough contribution to Didn Naturals. It was the kind of product that could redefine the industry and cement her reputation as more than just the little sister in the business. That morning, Grace was preparing for a presentation to her siblings when her phone buzzed with an alert. She frowned and opened the notification, which led to an article in a major industry publication. The headline hit her like a punch to the gut. Aurelia Skincare launches groundbreaking serum, praised as a game-changer for the industry. Her stomach twisted as she skimmed the article. The product's description was painfully familiar. A plant-based serum with the exact same proprietary blend she had been working on for years. It even used the same rare flower extract she discovered in a remote part of the Andes, a detail she hadn't shared with anyone outside the family. Her heart raced as she stared at the screen, bile rising in her throat. There was no way this was a coincidence. Grace. Emily's voice snapped her out of her daze. Her sister strode into the lab, her heels clicking against the tiled floor. The investors are expecting us in an hour. Are you ready to show them the serum? Grace swallowed hard, her hands trembling as she clutched her phone. We need to talk, she said, her voice shaking. Now. The meeting room in their sleek headquarters was suffused with tension as Grace placed the article in front of Emily and Noah. Emily's perfectly manicured hands froze mid-air as she scanned the text, her expression darkening. Noah leaned back in his chair, his brow furrowed. This can't be right, Emily said, her voice tight. How could they know about this? It's not even finalized yet. Grace's voice cracked as she explained. They didn't just know about it. They've launched it. That's my formula. They even mentioned the Andean flower extract. That wasn't public knowledge. Someone gave it to them. Noah ran a hand through his hair, his expression unreadable. You think someone stole it? Obviously, Grace snapped, more panicked than angry. The only people who had access were us. Someone in this room, she faltered, glancing between her siblings. Someone betrayed me. Emily's face hardened. Grace, don't jump to conclusions. There's got to be another explanation. Maybe a supplier leaked it. No. Grace interrupted. The supplier didn't even know the full formula. I kept it locked down. Her voice dropped to a whisper. It had to be someone with access to our files. Emily opened her mouth to respond but was cut off by Noah, who crossed his arms defensively. Are you seriously accusing one of us? His tone was sharp. We've worked too hard to build this company. Why would we sabotage ourselves? I don't know. Grace shot back, tears brimming in her eyes. But someone did, and I'm going to find out who. The room fell into an uneasy silence. Emily glanced at Noah, her lips pressed into a thin line. For the first time in years, cracks were beginning to show in the Bennett family's united front. The tension in the meeting room lingered long after Grace stormed out, her footsteps echoing down the sleek hallway. Emily and Noah exchanged uneasy glances, both trying to process what had just happened. She's overreacting, Noah muttered, leaning back in his chair. Emily shook her head, her jaw tight. Is she, though? That formula is one of a kind. It's not something you just stumble upon. This is bad, Noah. Really bad. Noah sighed, rubbing his temples. Okay, let's think this through. Who else had access? The lab assistants? IT? Anyone outside the company? Not a chance, Emily said firmly. Grace is paranoid about security. She's always been meticulous. Passwords on everything. No external servers. Nothing. The only people who had full access are the three of us. Noah's eyes narrowed. So what are you saying? One of us leaked it? Emily hesitated, her silence saying more than she intended. Grace paced her lab, her hands trembling with frustration. She kept replaying the launch announcement in her head. Every detail of that serum was hers. The years of research, the endless trial and error. The idea that someone could steal it from under her nose made her stomach churn. She sat down at her computer, logging into the company's internal system to review the file's access history. A list of usernames and timestamps appeared on the screen, her own name at the top. As she scrolled, a cold wave of disbelief washed over her. Noah's name was there, several times, at odd hours. Her mind raced. Noah was the production lead, so it wasn't unusual for him to review formulas. But why would he be accessing her private project at 3 a.m.? Before she could overthink it, she grabbed her phone and dialed his number. Noah was in his office when his phone buzzed. Seeing Grace's name, he sighed and picked up. Grace, if you're calling to accuse me of something, why were you in my files? Grace cut him off, her voice sharp and accusatory. Noah froze. What are you talking about? I saw the access logs, she said, her voice trembling. You've been in my project folder. At night. After hours. What were you doing, Noah? Noah stood, gripping the edge of his desk. I was reviewing production specs. That's my job, Grace. Do you really think I'd steal from you? From us? I don't know what to think anymore, Grace snapped. But I know one thing. Someone took that formula, and your name is all over it. Grace, stop, Noah said, his tone hardening. I didn't do anything, and you know it. You're letting paranoia get to you. Before Grace could respond, the line went dead. Noah had hung up. Later that evening, Emily sat in her study, scrolling through social media posts about Aurelia Skincare's new launch. The product was already a viral sensation, with influencers raving about its transformative results. Each glowing review felt like another dagger in the heart of their family business. She opened her email and began combing through correspondence with suppliers, marketing consultants, and investors. Something wasn't adding up. One email caught her eye, a message from their largest investor, Mark Whitman. He'd mentioned a meeting with Noah just a week before the launch. It had seemed routine at the time, but now it felt like a puzzle piece falling into place. Emily picked up her phone and called Mark. He answered on the second ring. Mark, it's Emily Bennett, she said, keeping her tone light. Quick question. What did you and Noah discuss in your meeting last week? Mark hesitated. Mostly projections for the new product line. Why? Did he mention Grace's serum? Another pause. Not exactly, but he did ask a lot about the Andean flower supplier you've been working with. Why? Is something wrong? Emily clenched her jaw. Nothing I can't handle. Thanks, Mark. She ended the call and sat back in her chair, her thoughts racing. She didn't want to believe Noah could betray them, but the evidence was piling up. The next day, Grace decided to confront Aurelia Skincare directly. If her siblings weren't going to help her, she'd handle it herself. She scheduled a meeting with Aurelia's CEO, Vanessa Reed, under the guise of a potential collaboration. Vanessa, a sharp woman with an icy demeanor, welcomed her into a sleek office overlooking the city. As they exchanged pleasantries, Grace got straight to the point. Let's not dance around it. Your new serum, it's my formula. How did you get it? Vanessa's expression didn't flinch. I have no idea what you're talking about, she said smoothly. Our formula is entirely original. Don't lie to me, Grace shot back. I know it's mine. Just tell me how you got it. For a moment, Vanessa hesitated, then leaned forward, lowering her voice. Off the record? I don't know the details, but we received a proposal weeks ago. It came from someone on the inside at Didn Naturals. They offered us the formula in exchange for a sizable payout. Grace's breath hitched. Who? Vanessa gave a small, knowing smile. I'm afraid I can't say, but if I were you, I'd start looking closer to home. Grace walked out of Aurelia Skincare's office, her mind racing. Vanessa Reed's words echoed in her head. I'd start looking closer to home. The revelation left Grace feeling betrayed and hollow. Someone from her own family had sold her formula. But who and why? Her instincts told her to dig deeper before accusing anyone outright. If she confronted her siblings again without solid proof, it could backfire and further fracture their relationship. She decided to enlist help from someone she trusted implicitly, Mateo, Didn Natural's head of IT. Grace, I'm not supposed to access private employee data without approval, Mateo said, glancing nervously over his shoulder as he typed on his computer. Grace leaned closer to him, her voice firm but desperate. Mateo, this isn't just about company policy. Someone stole my work and sold it to our biggest rival. I need to know who. Please. Mateo sighed, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. Fine, but if anyone asks, you didn't get this from me. Minutes later, Mateo pulled up the system's access logs. Okay, here's what I'm seeing, he said. Your files were accessed multiple times over the past month, but none of these timestamps match your own logins. Grace peered at the screen. There's Noah's name again, she muttered. Mateo shook his head. It's not just Noah. Look. He highlighted another entry. Emily accessed your files too, twice. Late at night. Grace's stomach dropped. Both of her siblings had been in her files. And that's not all, Mateo added. One of the logins was made remotely, off-site. Someone downloaded your entire folder onto an external device. From where? Grace asked, her voice tight. Mateo clicked a few buttons. An IP address registered to the Harborview Suites. It's a hotel downtown. Grace's heart sank further. The timeline matched the night Emily and Noah had met with investors. Thanks, Mateo, Grace whispered, her head spinning. That evening, Grace confronted her siblings in the family's sprawling dining room. Emily sat at the head of the table, scrolling through her phone, while Noah leaned against the wall, arms crossed. We need to talk, Grace said, stepping into the room and closing the door behind her. Emily looked up, her brows knitting together. What now? Grace threw a printed copy of the access logs onto the table. Explain this, she demanded, her voice trembling. Noah walked over and picked up the paper. As his eyes scanned the page, his face darkened. Are you seriously spying on us now? Grace ignored him, turning to Emily. Why were you in my files? And don't lie, I have the logs. Emily's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. I was reviewing marketing projections, Emily finally said, her voice defensive. You were behind schedule, and I wanted to make sure everything was on track for the next quarter. And the remote login from the Harborview Suites? Grace asked, her eyes narrowing. Emily froze. Noah turned to her, his expression hardening. What's she talking about, Emily? Emily hesitated, then sighed heavily. Okay, fine. I was at the Harborview meeting with Mark Whitman. He wanted details about upcoming projects before signing off on new funding. And you just gave it to him? Grace snapped. No. Emily shot back. I didn't give him anything specific. I only shared some general info to keep him interested. But you accessed my files, Grace accused. Emily's silence spoke volumes. Before the argument could escalate, Noah slammed the logs onto the table. Enough. Emily might be sneaky, but she's not the one who leaked the formula. Emily glared at him. Oh, and you're a saint? Yeah, I accessed the files, Noah admitted. But only because I had questions about scaling production. I didn't sell anything. Grace crossed her arms, her voice sharp. So we're supposed to believe both of you accessed my files for innocent reasons? How convenient. The siblings stared at each other, the air thick with mistrust. Then Emily's phone buzzed on the table. A notification popped up on the screen. Mark Whitman. We need to talk. Call me ASAP. Grace snatched the phone before Emily could react. What's this about? Give me that. Emily lunged for the phone, but Grace held it out of reach. She opened the message thread and froze. Mark's earlier text scrolled across the screen. Mark, Aurelia's CEO reached out. They're using the serum. How did they get it? Mark, if this comes back to me, I'm done with Didn. Grace looked up, her face pale. Mark knew. He knew about the formula, and he knew they were using it. Emily's face fell, her defenses crumbling. Grace, I swear, I didn't know he'd go to Aurelia. I only shared surface-level details. I didn't think he'd. You didn't think, Grace interrupted, her voice shaking with anger. You handed him everything he needed to sell us out. Noah stepped between them, his voice calm but firm. Enough. This isn't just Emily's fault. If Whitman's involved, we're all in trouble. Grace glared at them both. This isn't over. I'm going to find out exactly what happened, and when I do, you'd better pray you're not the one responsible. The Bennett family dinner table, once a place of laughter and shared ideas, was now a battlefield of mistrust and accusations. The revelation of Emily's involvement with Mark Whitman left the siblings reeling. Grace's anger was palpable, Noah's frustration simmered beneath the surface, and Emily sat silently, staring at her untouched glass of wine. So, let me get this straight, Grace began, pacing the room like a prosecutor in court. You handed confidential details about my formula to Mark, thinking what? That he wouldn't use them? Emily's lips tightened, and she rubbed her temples. I didn't think he'd betray us, Grace. Mark's been an investor for years. He's always supported Eden. I thought giving him a little information would secure more funding, not hand him the key to everything I've worked for? Grace interrupted, her voice rising. Emily flinched, guilt flickering in her eyes. I made a mistake, but I didn't sell out your formula. That's not who I am. Grace scoffed. You're telling me you didn't consider the possibility? Mark wanted specifics, Emily. He was fishing for something big, and you handed it to him on a silver platter. Noah leaned forward, his fists clenched on the table. We're getting off track. Whether Emily told Mark too much or not, the formula's out there. The real question is, how do we fix this? Grace stopped pacing and turned to him, her eyes blazing. Fix it? We can't just fix it, Noah. That formula was supposed to be my contribution to this company, to our legacy. It's ruined now. Emily stood, her voice trembling with both anger and regret. Do you think I wanted this? I've worked just as hard for this company as you have, Grace. I didn't sabotage you on purpose. Didn't you? Grace shot back. You've always been the golden child. The one everyone listens to, the one who gets the credit. Maybe you didn't care about the consequences because it wasn't your work on the line. Emily's face fell, hurt flashing across her features. That's not fair. Noah groaned and stood, slamming his hand on the table. Enough. Both of you. This constant fighting isn't solving anything. He turned to Grace, his tone softer but firm. You're angry, and you have every right to be. But tearing Emily apart won't bring the formula back. He turned to Emily next. And you should have been smarter. You should have thought about what handing over details could mean. But we're here now, and pointing fingers won't help us move forward. The room fell into a tense silence, the weight of Noah's words settling over them. After a long pause, Emily grabbed her phone and stormed toward the door. You know what? Fine. I screwed up. If you want to blame me for everything, go ahead. But don't expect me to sit here and take it. Grace crossed her arms. Running away? How typical. Emily froze in the doorway, her shoulders tense. She turned back, her voice low but cutting. You think I don't feel guilty? I do. But maybe if you stopped acting like the victim for 5 minutes, you'd realize we're all trying to fix this. With that, she walked out, leaving Grace and Noah behind. Noah sighed and sank back into his chair. This is a mess. Grace sat down across from him, her anger giving way to exhaustion. Do you really think she didn't know what she was doing? Noah hesitated, then shook his head. I don't know, Grace. Emily's reckless sometimes, but I don't think she'd intentionally hurt you. She's just desperate to prove herself, like all of us. Grace rested her head in her hands. And now we're falling apart because of it. Later that night, Grace couldn't sleep. Her mind kept replaying the events of the day, every argument and accusation echoing in her head. Frustrated, she decided to review the access logs again. Maybe there was something she'd missed. As she scrolled through the timestamps, something caught her eye, a login from an unregistered device. It wasn't linked to Emily, Noah, or anyone else in the company. The access had occurred just days before Aurelia's launch, and the files downloaded included not just the formula but Grace's personal notes. Her pulse quickened. This was the proof she needed to clear her siblings, or to condemn someone else. The next morning, Grace confronted Mateo in the IT department. "I found a login from an unregistered device," she said, holding up the logs. "Can you trace it?" Mateo frowned, peering at the screen. "It's tricky, but I can try. Give me a few hours." When Mateo called Grace back that afternoon, his expression was grim. "I traced the IP address to a private network," he said. "It's registered to Mark Whitman's company." Grace's stomach churned. "Mark?" Mateo nodded. "It gets worse. The device that logged in was authorized by someone in your family. The signature matches a login Emily used once before." Grace's blood ran cold. It wasn't just Mark who had betrayed them. Emily had authorized him to access their systems. She clenched her fists, the realization hitting her like a tidal wave. Emily hadn't just made a mistake. She had deliberately given Mark access to her files, knowing the risks. The weight of the truth settled heavily on Grace's shoulders as she stared at the evidence Mateo had provided. Emily hadn't just made a careless mistake. She had knowingly given Mark Whitman access to the files. The betrayal cut deeper than Grace could have imagined. But there was no time to dwell on her feelings. Didn Naturals was on the line, and the damage had to be contained. That evening, Grace summoned Emily and Noah to the family home. The air was thick with tension as the three siblings sat around the same dining table that had become a battlefield just days before. "I know who gave Mark the formula," Grace said, her voice steady but cold. Emily's face tightened, her knuckles whitening as she gripped her glass. Noah glanced between them, his expression wary. "Emily," Grace continued, sliding the printed logs and Mateo's report across the table. "It was you." Emily didn't even look at the papers. Instead, she leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrowing. "You don't understand." "Then explain," Grace snapped, her voice rising. "Explain how you could do this to me. To us." Emily sighed, rubbing her temples. "Fine. Yes, I gave Mark access. But I didn't think he'd take it this far. He promised me it was just for a review, something to help him understand the potential of the formula before committing to more funding. You trusted him more than your own family?" Noah said, his tone sharp with disbelief. "It wasn't about trust." Emily shot back, her voice cracking. "It was about survival. Do you have any idea how close we are to losing everything? Sales have been flat for months, and the investors are getting restless. Mark was ready to pull out unless we showed him something new. I thought if I gave him a glimpse of Grace's work, it would save the company." "Save the company?" Grace repeated, her voice trembling with anger. "You didn't save anything, Emily. You handed him the formula, and now Aurelia is profiting off years of my work. I didn't mean for this to happen." Emily's voice broke, tears streaming down her face. "I was trying to protect all of us. Don't you see that?" Noah shook his head, disgust evident in his expression. "You didn't protect anyone. You just made us vulnerable. And now we have to clean up your mess?" As the tension reached a breaking point, Grace took a deep breath, forcing herself to stay calm. "We can't undo what's happened," she said, "but we can still fight back." Emily wiped her tears, her voice small. "How?" Grace leaned forward, her determination shining through. "I've been working on an upgraded version of the serum, a more potent formula that's faster and longer lasting. It's not finished, but if we fast-track it, we can launch before Aurelia's product saturates the market." "That's risky," Noah said. "If the formula isn't ready, it could backfire." "It's a calculated risk," Grace countered, "and it's our only shot at saving Eden." Noah nodded reluctantly. "What about Mark? He still has access to our systems." "Not anymore," Grace said. "I've already had Mateo lock him out, and we're filing an injunction against Aurelia for intellectual property theft. It won't stop their sales immediately, but it'll slow them down." Emily hesitated. "And what about me?" Grace met her sister's eyes, her expression unreadable. "That depends on you." The siblings worked through the night, setting aside their anger to focus on the task at hand. Grace finalized the upgraded formula, Noah ramped up production, and Emily reached out to investors, using her connections to rally support. The launch was a success. The upgraded serum hit the market with a splash, quickly eclipsing Aurelia's product. Customers raved about the results, and Eden Naturals regained its footing. But the scars of the betrayal remained. One evening, weeks after the launch, Emily approached Grace in the lab. "I know you'll never fully forgive me," she said quietly, "but I want you to know I'm sorry. For everything." Grace looked up from her work, her expression softening. "I don't know if I can trust you again," she admitted, "but I appreciate that you're trying to make things right." Emily nodded, her eyes brimming with tears. "I'll keep trying." Months later, the Bennett siblings stood together at a company event, celebrating Eden Naturals' comeback. The atmosphere was lighter, but the lessons of their ordeal lingered. As Grace took the stage to thank their team, she glanced at her siblings in the crowd. Emily gave her a small, encouraging smile, and Noah nodded in quiet support. The road to rebuilding their trust was long, but for the first time in months, Grace felt hopeful. They had weathered the storm together, and though their bond was fractured, it was not beyond repair.